In our recent discussion about love, we began by defining what love is. That definition may have been good or bad, but at least it enabled the conversation to proceed in a clear and consistent way. Oline, once again, and salutations to the Truth Core, whoever or wherever you may be on the planet. This is a public sanity alert coming from yours truthfully. And the title of this talk is Anti-Semantics are the bane of our existence. Since this talk concerns the terms of agreement about the language we use in a conversation, it would of course be wise to clarify the term anti-semantic. Well, I might compare it to something that someone, whose initials are EZ, said many years ago in the 80s. This happened in Canada. And he said, well, anti-Semitism wouldn't exist if Semitism didn't exist. And that statement can be applied to many things. For instance, anti-termitism. Well, anti-termitism, which means the policy and practice of eliminating termites, wouldn't exist, would it, if termitism didn't exist? And of course, termitism is just an ism word for the general program and activity of termites. We've got a bad case of termitism in the house, you see? Now, in this case, obviously, the operative term is semantics. And it can refer to the science or practice of semantics. I'll get to that in a moment. Or it can refer to someone who follows that practice. For instance, I can say to you, I am a semantic. And therefore, anti-semantic refers to something that is against me, against my practice of semantics. So let's proceed from there. First off, what is the definition of the word semantics? Well, it refers to a branch of linguistics and logics which is dedicated to determine the meaning of words. It goes back to the Old Greek term semantikos, which means significant. So when we talk, if we're sane and rational and amiable and agreeable, we have the shared intention to arrive at the true significance of something. And we get there together if we have a good conversation, if we follow the simple rules of the dialectic process. At the beginning of this talk, I quoted someone from ancient Greece who was considered to be, in a way, the founder of dialectic, which is a fancy word for conversation, and also, in some respects, the earliest teacher of semantics, and that was Socrates. So here it is again. This is from the Platonic dialogue called the Phaedrus. In our recent discussion about love, we began by defining what love is. That definition may have been bad or good, but at least it enabled the conversation to proceed in a clear and consistent way. End quote. Simple enough, right? From that statement by Socrates, I offer you this principle. All sane and productive conversation depends upon semantic agreement. In order to realize the impact and the importance of that simple statement, Here's an example of a conversation that would proceed without semantic agreement. 3 cads sit down at a table and they decide they're going to have a conversation about bar. Now, one of them assumes semantically the significance of the word bar to mean a bar, someplace where you go drink. The second tad in the conversation assumes that it means a bar of music. And the third one assumes that it means a bar of gold, such as an ingot. And so they proceed with the previous presumption of 3 different meanings for the word bar. Imagine how that conversation would unfold. It would quickly prove to be total nonsense, because one participant using the word bar would be referring to places that you go and drink, and the other one would be responding and offering comments based on the meaning of bar as a bar of music. It's a dumb example, but it's a pertinent example. And it shows exactly what happens when people enter into a conversation, when they try to communicate with each other, when they have not established semantic agreement about what they're talking about. So you see, Socrates said, if I might paraphrase the old dude, that it's provisional. We define terms provisionally. They may be good or bad. They may be excellent or mediocre. But we need to define terms and agree on those definitions in order to have a conversation that goes anywhere and leads to the discovery of meaning and leads to agreement about the topic under consideration. I mean, isn't it simple? It's so clear that it's dumb. But what's really is dumb is to not make that semantic agreement in the first place. Failure or refusal to make that agreement is the anti-semantic attitude. And the anti-semantic attitude is the bane of human existence. Here's another example, and this is a current example, rampantly obvious in the public discourse of the world today, as well as in private conversations. This issue could come up in a family conversation or discussion with a friend or stranger at a train station. It could come up in academic discourse. It could come up, and often does come up, on the mainstream media. I say to you, I propose, let's have a conversation about white supremacy. Well, without semantic agreement about the meaning of white supremacy, how's that conversation going to work out? So picture me leaning on the fence in my backyard, and leaning on the other side of the fence is my neighbor Joe. And something comes up, and we decide to have a conversation about white supremacy. Now, I have a definition of what it is, and Joe has his definition. And if we commence the conversation without openly stating those 2 definitions and going on by agreement to a definition we can both agree on and use consistently, then what kind of conversation are we going to have about white supremacy? There won't be one. There will not be one. There shall not be a sane, open, even-minded conversation about that topic. The view of anti-semantics, who are legion in the world today, is obtuse, stubborn, and perverse. If they want to talk about anything at all, if they're willing to enter any kind of conversation, they will only talk about it with a complete bias for their definition, for their semantic definition of a term. And they will overrule dismiss, and attack your definition if it's different from theirs. It's a no-go from the first word of the conversation. So the leading point here that I want to make to you, which is also the takeaway, is simple. It's impossible to have a conversation due to the anti-semantic attitude of others. I can only have a fruitful, instructive conversation with someone else in which we both arrive at some significant insight or conclusion. We both arrive at a significant outcome if we agree on the semantics of the conversation. Without semantic agreement, no sane and productive conversation is possible. And it so happens that we're living at a time in human history which is unique due to the prevalence of the anti-semantic attitude. And this is extremely unfortunate, and it is extremely difficult and problematical in all areas of life regarding all topics of discussion. Here's another blatant example. Well, let's have a discussion about climate change. It's impossible to have a discussion about climate change with anyone who is anti-semantic, because that individual will not be disposed to make an agreement with you about the definition of climate change. They will insist on their definition, they will not listen to your definition, and they will not agree to have a common definition, good or bad, excellent or mediocre, that will at least permit a sane and sober conversation to take place. Without semantic agreement, human animals in society cannot converse with each other. Period. Have you ever heard the saying, communication is the lifeblood of a relationship? You may agree that that's true. I certainly do. And I know from many, many experiences that my friendships, close friendships, as well as social associations, as well as my professional experience in teaching and talking publicly, have proven that to be true. So, to switch to another metaphor, you could say that communication is the currency of social interactions. It's the currency we use to transact with each other about all of the important issues of life, what matters to us, what our values are, our insights, what we know, what we don't know. Communication is the currency that keeps a social order running and that allows society to survive and even to thrive. So I take it that all that is pretty clear, and after all, isn't it just common sense? It's obvious, isn't it? It's self-evident. But given that so, turn around and look at the situation in the world today. Where is semantic agreement in public discourse? Where do you see it? You hardly see it anywhere. And the reason for that is because semantic agreement is forbidden. It's not openly forbidden. You don't see a sign on the wall of a restaurant or a public gathering place or a park, a big sign that says, no dogs allowed on the lawn, no semantic agreements allowed in this space. But that is in fact the case. There is a huge interdiction against semantic agreement. And that is why anti-semantics are the bane of our existence. Having said that, I'm going to take this public sanity alert around the bend and go to another topic and directly conclude this talk, thank goddess it's fairly brief, by focusing on this other topic, which is the solution to getting out of the trap that humanity is in today. The solution to overcoming the plan and schemes of the transhumanists and the technocrats who have openly made their claim that they will change what it means to be human. That's a semantic threat. And they will also impose upon you all kinds of measures to ruin your life if you do not play along with their agenda for the Great Reset. So here I am talking about solution. The solution of the crime against humanity, the defeat of the technocrats and the psychopaths who have taken the leading places in the social order, and all of the accomplices and enablers and the useful idiots that they have recruited into their great scheme, which is a scheme to destroy not only the natural and human way of living, but to destroy society as we know it. This is what we're facing. And I've proposed a formula of solution according to 3 R's. First R is recovery. So it will be necessary to recover the natural and normal ways of life in which people live together, in which they associate or choose their associations, as well as the way they pursue their livelihood in a common agreement not to harm or deceive others, you see. So recovery of all that, or the restoration of that way of life, which is natural to our species, is the first R. The second R is reparation. And that means claiming from all those who have perpetrated this harm reparations. For instance, reparations for all businesses that have failed. Where has the money gone? Who owns the airlines? Who owns all the buildings that have been sold off? Commercial real estate due to the failure of businesses. Where is all that money? There are countless trillions of dollars in the hands of the enemies of life, the perpetrators, who get richer as this ruin continues. Second stage is reparation. To take that from them, the resources and the finances that they have accumulated by this crime, and turn it back for the good of society. Repay people for the loss of their businesses. Finance them through a civic banking system with no interest, so that they can rebuild their businesses, their restaurants, the tourist industry, and everything that matters and everything that we naturally enjoy and need to live together. Second R, reparation. Third R is revenge. I won't elaborate on that. That would go to another subject, but you get the picture. Now, what I want to say, and I haven't said this before in quite this way, is really important to me. The solution is known. The solution to beating this crime against humanity and to exposing, opposing, and overcoming the Soviet deceit is known. And it's not simply known to a small handful of people. It's known to countless millions of people. There is the solution in the larger sense, according to these three terms that I'm proposing. And there is the key to the solution. I ask you to consider that. Suppose, for instance, that I propose to you that we go on a great journey and we travel up and down the coast, the west coast of the United States. And here I have a beautiful van. It's equipped with all the necessities. It's beautifully appointed. And all we have to do is step into the van, come on in, sit down over there, I'll drive, I'm sitting here. We have everything we need. We have a certain food supply. We have everything on board. But we don't have the key to the ignition. Therefore, we're not going to go anywhere, are we? Well, this is the situation today. The solution is known. The solution has been established. It's been known for a really, really long time, and I mean centuries. But the solution today, of course, is more urgent than it ever was. So if I say to you, all the factors necessary for the solution are at hand, but there is no key for the ignition, then what do I mean by the key for the ignition? One simple factor puts the entire solution into action. And millions of people are ready to go into action with the solution and take it all the way into the beauty to come. But no one is going to get anywhere without the key to the ignition. And as long as you don't have the key in your hand, the problem will continue to worsen, and it will become more and more complicated until it will look impossible to resolve. It is not impossible to resolve. In fact, it could have been resolved in centuries past, recent centuries. There were attempts to resolve it for over 2,000 years. The problem of the eternal strangers has been with humanity for a long time. It's coming to light now in a way it never has before. But believe me, you can go look at the evidence. The problem has been identified and semantically defined perfectly many, many times in the past. So I would say to you, as a message of encouragement, take heart. Because many millions of people know how to solve this problem, this crime against humanity. Then why aren't we solving it? It's forbidden to have a semantic agreement about the core of the problem. And there is a core. I've written about it a lot in Not in His Image, and I've talked about it a lot. There is a core to the particular form of evil, which I call social evil, operating on this planet. There is a root to that evil. But there is also, as I said before, well, what can you call it? A rule? An interdiction? A taboo? How about calling it a policy? Let's make a semantic agreement. The perpetrators who impose tyrannical and insane rules upon society have a policy. It's their key policy. It is their key, the key to their power and their illusions of power, as well as it is the key to the solution, to defeat them. So they enforce a policy by which they do not allow, or they attempt to prevent, anyone from openly speaking about the source of evil. And by preventing that conversation to take place, which is the foundation of the anti-Semantic attitude and the anti-Semantic enforcement, well, there's no unity of agreement about the problem. Unity resides in the truth of truly knowing the significance of something based on a semantic agreement about it. The globalist overlords and the authorities have to work very hard on this one, because they know that we're people in the world, in small groups, in large groups, across entire countries, allowed to have a conversation, a semantic discussion of the core of the problem. Their game would be doomed just by having that conversation. Of course, then there would have to be action to follow up the conversation. But it looks like it's going to be difficult, if not impossible, to reach that stage of action if the conversation doesn't happen first. You feel me? You follow my drift? Remember that this talk is a public sanity alert, and I can't get it across to you strongly enough of how dangerous it is that the authorities prevent this conversation from happening. The authorities are anti-Semantic, and so are all of their minions and their enablers and their accomplices. And even your neighbor and your parents or your children are anti-Semantic. Teenagers are notoriously anti-Semantic about even trivial things in the family constellation, aren't they? They won't talk with you about it, will they? They will not sit down and have a simple conversation with an agreed upon topic that is clearly defined so the conversation can proceed. And that's a trivial example. What we're looking at today is a mass breakdown of communication. Now, in concluding, I want to advise you that the authorities actually can't prevent this conversation from happening. Not ultimately. But the problem is, and I'm guessing that each and every one of you has run into this issue, conversation requires two parties. So you may open the conversation that discloses the key to the solution, and you may invite unity through that conversation. But if the other party doesn't want to converse with you, if they refuse to, then there is no conversation, is there? So the problem is twofold. The authorities have set up the game so that they have set up the game by infusing enormous amount of fear around opening the conversation based on a semantic agreement of the topic of the conversation, the topic of the eternal strangers or the eternal strangeness in our midst, the alien and paranormal factor. That's one way of approaching a semantic agreement about what we're talking about, what we could talk about. So no, they can't prevent you from opening your mouth or initiating the conversation, but they've surrounded the topic with so much fear and so many threats that you're very likely to face nasty consequences even if you bring it up, even if you mention it. Now this has to change, and I assure you that the situation today will be hopeless if this doesn't change. Unless that conversation about the source of evil can happen, I don't see any way of getting out of this trap. The anti-semantics are the bane of our existence. They ruin everything. Your neighbor, your children, your parents ruin everything by shutting you down if you even mention certain subjects. That's anti-Sementicism at its worst. And of course, in the mainstream media, a free and open conversation of that kind is totally absent. Those who control the media would never allow such a conversation to take place. Let me give you an example in closing. How about a conversation about race? Now imagine a stage is set and cameras are in place to film a conversation and call it a debate. And on that stage, on one side, is a table with 5 panelists, and on the other side, another table with 5 panelists. And the purpose of the debate is for them to debate racism and race. Have you ever seen such a debate? No, you haven't. All you hear, according to those who control the media, is endless rhetoric coming from one side of the debate. Were there to be a fair and open debate with a semantic agreement at the basis of it, then that would be mighty, mighty powerful. And it would become obvious to any sane person what was wrong with one side of the debate. But if an issue cannot be debated, how can you ever expose what is wrong with one side of the debate, one side of the argument about race or racism? So anyway, I don't think you need any more examples. I'm guessing that I've made it pretty clear. And how is this helpful? How would it be? How would I like it to be helpful? Well, I think it could be helpful if you concentrate on the absence of semantic agreement wherever you go. If you put it in the forefront of your mind, and when you see it happening, remind yourself that unless that changes, there is no way to resolve the problem facing humanity today. And then you can reflect on that. You can ask yourself what you would do to make a difference and how you might contribute to that single and paramount breakthrough. Everything is ready. Millions of people know what the game is. I've written extensively about the game and tracked it back to its origins. But without the conversation, without free and open semantics, I don't see how humanity will ever extricate itself from this insane program of deception. Enough said, and I'll be seeing you in the beauty to come.